Well, we've already gotten some great leadership insights from our guests today before we hit record, and that's why I'm like, we gotta hit record and get all of this on tape. I'm John Gehring. This is the Limitless Leadership Lounge, joined as always by Coach Jim Johnson, Dr. Numa Kareem. Coach, you brought on Todd Cherches today. Let's introduce him and dive right in.
Yeah, I've gotten a chance to talk to Todd, and I'm really excited. And also, I got a chance to read his great book, which will certainly delve into some of that as well. But let me just read a little bio. Todd's done a lot in his life. So, Todd Churches is the CEO and co-founder of Big Blue Gumball LLC, an innovative New York City-based management and leadership consulting, training, and executive coaching firm. Big Blue Gumball's patented visual leadership methodology leverages the power of visual thinking and visual communications to equip, enable, and empower business professionals of all levels to maximize their performance, their productivity, and their potential. A three-time award-winning adjunct professor of leadership at NYU and a lecturer on leadership at Columbia University, Todd is also a TEDx speaker, a member of the Marshall Goldsmith 100 Coaches, and was the eight global finalists for the Thinker 50 Distinguished Achievement Award in Leadership in 2021. And also, I had the pleasure, and we'll delve into some of the great book, Visual Leadership, by our good friend here now, Todd Churches. So, Todd, welcome to the Limitless Leadership Lounge.
Thank you, Jim. I have your book as well, so I'm sure that'll come up in the conversation. So, both big sports fans, basketball, baseball, etc. So nice to see you again, and nice to meet Renuma and John.
Yeah, great. So,
Mhm.
so you know what? I'm going to delve in because we can go a lot of different angles, but because of the uniqueness of your title of your book, Visual Leadership, let's delve into that. Tell us about what do you mean by that?
Sure, very simply, visual leadership, which if you look at the word, the way it's spelled on the cover of my book, it's one thing. People don't notice it. That's part of visual thinking. We don't always notice everything right in front of us. It's spelled with one word with a shared capital L, which represents the fact that who we are and how we lead is inseparable from the lens through which we see the world, right? When we talk about
Mm.
leadership, we're always talking about vision. What's your vision? What is that picture in your mind's eye of a future state that's better than and different from the current reality? The lens through which you see the world shapes what you see. But as a leader, not everyone sees what you see. So part of your job as a leader is one, to formulate that vision, and two, to communicate that vision in a clear and compelling way so that others can see it. So I always say, my motto is, how do you get people to see what you're saying, right? How do you get that idea out of your head? Like as a coach, basketball coach, you can envision a play, but if you can't communicate it, and that's why we use the clipboard, right, with the X's and the O's and the map of the diagram of the court, so other people could see what's in your head, right? If you try to
Mm.
explain it verbally, they may or may not get it. You cut here, you set a pick here, but if you could see it on the clipboard, then you could execute it. So there's a saying that things are twice created, once in our mind and once in reality, right? So visual leadership helps to formulate, to clarify our mind so we can communicate it more effectively. So in essence, visual leadership is the application of visual thinking to the practice of leadership.
Mm. I hear you, Todd, because I'm a visual thinker.
Mhm.
So I do better because there are so many information nowadays, my phone, email. And that is why when I have something visually, like if I write it down or have some visual composition in front of me, I recall it
Mhm.
better.
Yeah.
So, and not only that, I found out that visual leadership, for the first time, I was trying to plan a community engagement neighborhood block party in Bangladesh, closing the street. I had to convey the message to the sponsors. So
Mm.
I had to collect pictures from the New York festivals and this and that, and then give a visual
Yeah.
representation. And they were all into that zone and wanted that for Bangladesh. So now it has become like a regular yearly festival
That's great.
just because I was able to give that visual
Yeah,
vision to them.
that's great.
So thank you so much for bringing this book to us, and it will definitely help us. My curiosity is, I was going through your TED talk, and in China, you went to China and you were communicating with the China workers there through like pictures or signs. If you were going to China now, with the progress of technology or innovation, how would you use the technology, or what is different? Is there anything differently you would do to provide those messages?
Yeah. Well, one thing, speaking of China, is my book was just translated into Mandarin and
Wow.
it's to be
Wow.
Wow.
released in China later on this year. So, in fact, I just sent a note
Congratulations.
last night. We're in a 12-hour time difference with China, so it's always hard to synchronize communication. So I'm just waiting to hear about the launch date, the publication date. So
Oh.
the first thing I would do is make sure they get the Chinese edition of my book.
Right.
I'm already calculating. Let's say there's billions of people in China. If each one buys a copy, how much I can return.
Exactly.
So, but regardless of the language, visuals help to cross cultural and communication lines. Because again, like when I was over there in China, they didn't speak much English. Some of them spoke no English. We didn't speak only a few words of Chinese. So I ended up picking up a pad and just drawing and sketching things, and with a lot of hand gestures, just like we use in American Sign Language, right? So it's like we don't communicate just in words, but in visual images, mental models, metaphors, storytelling. But that's one of the things my students in my class love is my PowerPoint slides are highly visual. I don't use a lot of text because
Mm,
80% of my students are international students from places like India and China and other places. So visuals help people to see what you're saying in a way that words alone don't. So I think, yeah, so whether it was back then or now, I think just the value of speaking the language of your audience as well. So that's something I learned over the years is like, for example, I may use a lot of basketball analogies when talking or metaphors when talking to Coach Johnson, but I may use baseball, when I'm here in the US or football. Although when you say football in the UK or somewhere else, they think soccer, right? They're thinking this football. When you say the
right.
same, so you can say the same word football, and people are envisioning two different kinds of balls, two playing fields, two different things. So that's a valuable lesson is to speak the language of your stakeholders, use metaphors that they will
Mm,
resonate with, stories that they can relate to. So I think that's a big part of my visual thinking approach is just teaching people, creating that awareness of, yeah, I'm speaking my language, but it's not translating it to their language. So
yeah,
uh,
metaphor change from culture to culture.
exactly.
So
That's why if you can
that is
find metaphors that are universal, like tennis is played all over the world, right? So
all of the right.
that's something that's more universal. Or using nature, right? Like if I say
Mm,
we need to get to the root of the problem, branch out in new directions, let's see which ideas bear fruit. I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'm using all tree related metaphors, and
mm,
we all may be picturing a different tree, but we all know what a tree is, right? So we could all
right.
those metaphors will relate to anyone.
So
And that's
true.
a good point too, because we just did a episode about networking here, just the
Mm,
three of us, and we talked about, well, I was thinking during the episode, well, everybody smiles in the same language. So no matter what, that's another one of those universal
yes.
cues, so to speak.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about some of the mistakes that young leaders make that you've seen, whether it be based on your visual leadership concepts or just based on you've worked with a lot of youth at the universities you work at.
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of cultural differences. One of them is generational, right? So different generations have different values, different lenses, different language, different acronyms, different jargon. So I think some things get lost in translation. Like a few times, students have sent me a text or an email using an abbreviation, and I literally had to go and look it up because I didn't know what it meant. So think again, just like with the metaphors and the stories, use language that your listener, your reader, your stakeholder will understand. So you have to need to what I call this is not in my book. I came up with a number of concepts after writing my book saying, "Oh, I wish it was in my book," but it's fine. Called flipping the eye. Flipping the eye is about turning that eye back on yourself. One, to look at yourself almost as if looking in the mirror, and also flipping the eye to try to see the world through the lens of others, right? So as a professor,
Mm,
I try to see things through the lens of my students. As an executive coach, I try to see the world through the lens of my clients. If I'm doing management training, I try to see it through the lens of the people attending my programs. So I think that's the key thing is just be aware, and again, teach other people to be aware of speaking. Try to find a common language that you can both speak and understand. I once mentioned in my class, I asked a question, there was dead silence. I said, "It's like Sound of Silence in here. Does everyone know that song by Simon and Garfunkel?" My students thought Simon and Garfunkel was a management consulting firm, or there was, there was no name recognition at all there. So I'm like, I'm aging myself. So So that's an example of, using a reference, or, I have a thing where I do a session on metaphors. And I say, life is like a box of blank with a picture of Tom Hanks sitting on the bench from Forrest Gump. My students have no idea. Life is like a box of Kleenex tissues. Life is like a box of, they have no idea, because a lot of them are international students. They don't know Tom Hanks. They've never seen Forrest Gump. They don't know that quote. But even when I said life is like a box of chocolates, in what ways? Still blank silence, right? So it's kind of like the ideas until you bite into it and see, is it the cherry or is it the marshmallow or whatever? We don't know. So just like, how is life like that? For people who know the movie, it's instantaneous. For people who have no idea what I'm talking about, sometimes metaphors can confuse instead of connect, right? So again, with that awareness, customized to your audience.
Great point. Hey,
Yeah.
Todd, one thing that really cracked me up, that you've weaved through the book. So I'd love to, if you could share a story, because you talk about all the things you've learned about from bad bosses.
Mm.
So if you could share a story about one of your bad bosses and something you learned that you could share with our audience, I think that'd be really fun.
Sure. I mean, unfortunately, I held the Guinness Book of World Records for having bad bosses. So that's what I'm most famous for. I always say there's three industries that tend to have toxic leadership. One is Hollywood, where I worked. Another is Wall Street, where I also worked, and another is Washington, D.C., which is, so in those three cultures. So Wall Street is New York, Hollywood is California, Washington is politics in Washington. So it's kind of like that triangle of tyranny, of terrible bosses. It's gotten better in some ways over the years, but yeah, when I worked in Hollywood, I had many terrible bosses. One of whom, there's a chapter in my book, I forget which chapter number. I think it's towards the beginning, like chapter 5. It's called My Love Letter to Horrible Bosses, and I repost it as a blog post every Valentine's Day. Because if it wasn't for the horrible bosses, I wouldn't have gone into what I do today, right? That's what drove me into management leadership development and executive coaching, because my mission statement is trying to help make the world a better place, one leader at a time, and to me, everyone is a leader, right? So that's my foundational mission statement. But so one day I was working at a TV network, I won't say which one, but it has an I as its logo. So I was sitting there, and I heard my boss's office door whip open. I felt something fly by my head, and she had thrown a box of pens at me because they were not the ones she wanted. So she wanted the medium point, and I got her the fine point. I actually ordered the right ones, but the supply room sent up the wrong ones. But instead of just saying, "Hey Todd, these are not the pens I want. Can we exchange them?" She flung open her door, threw the box at me, and missed my ear by an inch. The box broke up, and the pens went all over the place. In fact, still when I see someone coming at me with a Papermate, I have post-traumatic stress disorder. I dive to the ground. But again, that taught me to be a more empathetic and compassionate leader, to forgive mistakes, to keep things in perspective, right? She already had pens on her desk. Was this the end of the world? Not at all, right? So it's like, but that's how she reacted to everything. Everything was a catastrophe. So another lesson, don't catastrophize things. Don't make mountains out of molehills, right? So again, all of these experiences shape who you are and how you are as leaders, how you treat people. I always use the Nelson Mandela quote, I never lose, I either win or I learn, right?
Yeah.
So even when you don't win, if you learn something from it. So even though that was a horrible, traumatic experience, I learned from it. I'm still telling that story 30 years later, and it resonates. And, so when you see movies like The Devil Wears Prada or Swimming with Sharks, all these movies about horrible bosses, people are like, oh, that's exaggerated. That's just Hollywood. I'm like, it's not exaggerated. I live it. And that's just one of many stories I've had of those bad bosses. So, so that's, there's a difference between being, I spend a lot of work teaching the distinctions between being a manager and a leader, right? Management and leadership. They're two sides of a coin. So there's a saying, you manage processes, you lead people. Right. So when you're managing, that's about scheduling and budgeting and getting the right people in the right seats on the bus, as Jim Collins said in Good to Great. Right. So that's management. Leadership is about the people side. That's the vision. That's the motivation. That's the caring and the compassion and the coaching and all those kinds of things. So we need to do both. So if you're a good manager and you're better on the management side of the ledger, focus on being a better leader. And if you love the inspirational people side, you may also need to work on your management skills. And I always talk about 2 Ds in my classes, details and deadlines. I say that to my students, remember those 2 Ds. If you just read the syllabus, right? With all assignments, if you pay attention to the details and you meet the deadlines, you will do well in the class. You'll get at least a B or B plus. to get the A, you have to go A, B, C, D, which is above and beyond the call of duty. You have to not just meet the expectations, but exceed the expectations, right? So again, details and deadlines. But if you don't fulfill the details and meet the deadlines, then you're setting yourself up for failure. So that whether that's in school, at work, or in life, remember those 2 Ds. So that's one of the lessons I teach to my students on day one, and that helps them. But one other metaphor I use when distinguishing between management and leadership, managers look through a microscope, leaders look through a telescope. So if you just let that visual metaphor sink in, when you're managing, you're looking through a microscope down into the details and deadlines. You're looking for, that's where you're managing projects, your task and execution focus. As a leader, you're looking out into the stars, right? You're looking far and wide into the future. So, and I would say innovators look through a kaleidoscope, right? Which kind of scrambles things up and helps you to see things in a completely different lens. So just those 3 metaphors. Do I need to look through a microscope, a telescope, or a kaleidoscope right now? That's a great lens. Because as you know, those of us we all wear glasses, it seems. All 4 of us are wearing glasses. If your prescription is off, you're going to get a distorted view of things, right? You won't be able to see distance or read the small print. You need to have the lens that fits the situation and fits you.
Right. Beautifully said. And I do agree that bosses make a difference when you want to, with your higher productivity and performance. And I had my 2 or 3 shares of bad bosses from where I learned and grew to be a better leader, not to do things that they did.
Yes.
So thanks for sharing that. And I think that we are in the leadership role, are also in the position of show and tell.
Yes.
And not only that, we also look into the future self, as you mentioned, like through the telescope. So inner person, like how am I going to grow as a leader? And often the pilots, I think there are those videos on like how fighter pilots will imagine themselves flying before they're actually in the plane. So they're visually imagining their flight path and everything. And Nikola Tesla would also imagine things before, design the whole thing in his brain before he brought it into reality. So from your point of view, what is this power of internal visualization? We can make other people see, but also sometimes we need to see it for ourselves also to believe.
Yeah, it's so important. In sports, for example, if I mentioned my softball team is playing in the playoffs. If I'm the next batter up, I'm watching the pitcher, I'm seeing the situation, how many outs, where are the runners on base. So I'm visualizing. You go up to the plate with a plan, right? You don't just go up there. How is the pitcher throwing? Is it very fast or very slow? So same thing, basketball. If you've shot enough free throws, you can sometimes I practice shooting free throws with my eyes closed, right? You see the ball through the hoop. If you've done it, it's muscle memory. So all of these visual excellence, and Jim, you know this more than I do, right? Visualizing the play out, and John Wooden talks about that as well, right? In advance. And again, it doesn't always, but you also need to improvise. You also need to, what if things don't go as planned, right? But you at least start with a visualization. If you're going on a trip or a vacation, right? You visualize what are you going to be doing so you can make the right choices. Are you going skiing or are you going to a beach location, right? How you pack for your trip is going to depend. So what you do is you visualize the flight. What do I need on the plane when I get there? Am I in business meetings or am I out on the beach? You need to visualize in advance. Otherwise, you get there and you're on the beach and you're wearing snow gear, right? So that's the thing. So I love that example of picturing in your mind's eye the future. If Walt Disney invented the storyboard technique, right? So instead of you don't go out and shoot a movie, you map it out. You have a mind map to get the ideas out of your head and onto a piece of paper. Then you storyboard it so you can see sequentially how something's going to play out before you even put pen to paper and eventually create the digital and everything else. So in all these scenarios, we need to create in our mind's eye before we start creating and executing in the real world.
Right.
Yeah, and visualization, there's so many now studies talking about the power of that. And also, you talk about the preparation through visualization too. That's another key concept. Is that something you work with people on as far as like once you see the ball go through the hoop, it's now more likely to go through the hoop and those kinds of things that many consider pseudoscience, but there's now a lot of real science to back it up.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I say to people, I don't care about the science, what works for you in reality, right? There was a whole scandal about Amy Cuddy did a great TED talk, one of the most popular ever, about the power pose, right? So there was questions about the science behind her study, But if you've ever done it, you know it works. The idea behind the power pose is before you take the stage, I was talking about going from backstage to on stage, right? When you're backstage, if you stand tall, stretch, breathe, expand yourself, like, like say if you're facing a bear in the forest, stand tall and try to make the bear think you're bigger than you are. When you do that, stand with hands on hips like Superman or Wonder Woman, you feel more powerful. Like before getting up to bat at softball, I stretch, I hold the bat over my head. There's a saying, act as if. If I act as if I'm a great hitter, I will hit better than if I act as if this pitcher's going to strike me out, right? So just getting in that mental state of positivity, hope, optimism, you're just more likely to be successful than if you think the opposite. Right. So I think that's a key thing. Like when I plan out my month, this is, I have an electronic calendar. I don't know if you can see this, those watching on YouTube. This is my monthly calendar. I keep this every year, and every day I also have another calendar. When you physically write, your body, it's a kinesthetic activity that downloads information from your brain through your arm into your hand. That's why I say to my students in my classes, take notes by hand. Do not bring your laptop to class, because you're just taking dictation, right? If you're just typing up the words I say, you don't need that. Jot down key. In order to take notes, you have to process it in a shorthand way and write it down, or doodle or draw a sketch in ways that you'll remember the information, right? So why do I keep this monthly calendar? So I could visualize how my whole month plays out, including weekends, and I get a sense of flow in a way that a digital calendar on your phone doesn't do the same thing. So again, whatever works for you, find ways to, you want to see the future, not just 10 years from now, but tomorrow. Right? What am I doing the night before I go to sleep? I think about what do I have tomorrow? What's on my schedule? I actually visualize how the day is going to play out. And it doesn't always go 100%, but even if it's 80% according to plan, it's like if you have a roadmap mapped out and you're going to a strange place, if you make a wrong turn, if you can visualize the map, you know how to get back on the highway or whatever. If you just have the linear directions, it's going to be a lot harder to get back to where you were. Right. And Alice in Wonderland, she asked, I forget if she asked the Cheshire Cat or the Mad Hatter, which way should I go? He says, where are you trying to get to? She says, I don't really know. He said, then it doesn't matter which way you go. Right. If you don't have a destination in mind or a vision, then it doesn't matter which way you go, which is fine sometimes too. Sometimes just wandering aimlessly, you never know what you'll stumble upon. But if you have a plan, if you have a deadline, then you want to visualize, the time and place and destination that you're trying to get to, metaphorically or literally.
And it's a great point. I taught my players visualization, and I think that helped immensely. Although I will say yesterday, when I played John in tennis, I visualized beating him, but his visualization must have been stronger than mine because he beat me up pretty good. So
well, it starts somewhere. So it always could have been worse, right?
So, but I got to ask you, I highly recommend your book. I thought it was so comprehensive with so many well thought ideas that help leaders. But I got to delve into one because I think it's difficult for leaders, and that is, can you share some ideas on how to give feedback and also how to accept feedback?
Yeah, I talk a lot about feedback. Feedback is when I do 360s of managers. That's one of the things that people get the worst feedback on, is their ability to give feedback well. It's a challenge, right? So Marshall Goldsmith, in his book "What Got You Here Won't Get You There," coined the term "feed forward." Right? So feedback is information about the past that we can learn from, but you can't change the past. Feed forward is advice about the future, right? So if you just separate those two things, past, present, and future, what happened already happened, right? Don't beat yourself up over it. I think I mentioned in my book, one of the Yankees players many years ago struck out 5 times in one game, and an announcer asked the manager, Joe Torre, what are you going to say to him? He said, I'm not going to say anything. He knows he struck out 5 times. If he strikes out like 5 times again tomorrow, then we have to figure out a solution to the problem. But I don't need to hit him over the head with something he already knows. And that's always stayed with me, right? So feedback, the purpose of feedback is future improvement. Right? It's not to beat people up. It's not to prove how smart you were or to make the other person wrong. So just from a management leadership perspective, realize what is the intention of feedback. Also, what's the time and place, right? The time to give feedback may not be in the middle of a game unless it's mission critical right then and there. Like, when you're shooting, your elbow's too high or, whatever. Save it for after the game. There's a classic picture that I use when I'm teaching coaching and feedback of John Wooden with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who at the time was Lou Alcindor, and when they're talking to each other, It's completely, they're on the court, but it's completely empty. No fans, no other players there. Kareem is standing there looking at him, looking down at him because he's 7'2", with his hands on his hips, listening intently. And John Wooden is standing there with his hands open. You could tell it was an intense one-on-one conversation. So think about with feedback, what is the right time? What is the right place? Is the person in the right mindset? Ask permission. Is this a good time? I have some feedback for you. Is this a good time to talk about it? Because sometimes in the heat of the moment, that might not be the best time. Right. So think about all those things. There's a lot of different feedback techniques, one of which that I write about, and I call it the name of the chapter is In Defense of the Feedback Sandwich. The feedback sandwich is a controversial model because it doesn't work in all situations. Feedback sandwich, very briefly, is start with a positive, the middle is the constructive, or critical, and the bottom bun is the close, right? So if I say to you, hey, you did these things really well in your presentation yesterday. Here are some things that you could have done better or could do better next time. And hey, I know you could do this if you put your mind to it and you practice. I just sandwich that feedback in a feedback sandwich way. If you only deliver the meat of the message metaphorically, then all people hear is the negative. If you only focus on the buns and you want to be positive and optimistic, you may not be giving people developmental or constructive feedback. So it's that combination. It's the ratio that matters, right? So again, there's some people who hate the model because it doesn't always work, and it's meant to be flattery. Like, hey, so and so, I love that shirt you're wearing. By the way, you're the worst employee I've ever had.
Yes.
That's not what it's meant to be, right? Hey, you're the worst employee I've ever had, and today's your last day. But hey, let's meet up for lunch when you get your new job, right? So that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about sandwiching, metaphorically, constructive feedback in between positives. Because people, when you get feedback that feels critical, your morale declines, you feel hopeless. But if you have that bottom bun, it boosts up the other person's morale, saying, hey, I know you could do this. Right. So I think that's why Adam Grant says, he calls it the compliment sandwich. Some people call it the crap sandwich. So when it's done in a flattering way, in a manipulative way, then don't do it. Don't use it. And it's not a one size fits all. No tool is one size fits all, right? It depends on the person's situation. But I always say, like, if my wife says, let's say clear the dinner table, put the dishes in the sink. My wife could say, why do you always leave the dishes in the sink? Right? That's just that meat of the message. If she says, Todd, thank you so much for clearing the table. You left the dishes in the sink. Next time, can you put them straight in the dishwasher? Love you, right? Which one is going to get me to do it, right? Which one's going to change my behavior, which is what this is all about, doing things better and differently and better the next time. So that's what I would say about feedback. And in terms of receiving it, it's very hard not to be defensive and feel hurt. But if it's done with intent and with love and with caring and with the purpose of helping you to improve for the next time, you're more receptive to it. There's a classic model by David Rock, who created the SCARF model, and I won't go into the whole SCARF model, but when you get negative feedback, like if your boss or your coach says, I need to talk to you, or step into my office, your body responds, your amygdala in your brain, the fight, flight, or fierce, kicks in. It triggers, it's a threat, right? Feedback could be seen as a threat or it could be seen as a reward. So it's all about how you deliver the feedback that really matters. So again, I could talk for hours about feedback, but those are a few key things to keep in mind. It's about future improvement. It's not beating someone up over something that they could no longer change because it already happened.
And Todd, because being in the leadership role, I have to give feedback continuously. And one of the things that you pointed out is specificity.
Yes.
Not just being redundant, but being specific of what feedback you are giving. And majority of the time, I don't call my team in the office or like face to face, giving them that kind of aura, like I have to talk to you. Just while they were working, if something goes wrong, I will just come over and gently point out like what they can do better. So not inviting them into the office space, but just walking past or something like that. What is your take? Like, is it okay to do that? Those kind of feedback
Yeah, that's a great
during the
point.
job?
Feedback should be a conversation, it should be a dialogue, not a monologue, right? So one of the best things I learned when I first became years ago, I was always, even though I've done a TED Talk, even though I teach at 2 universities, even though I talk really fast, I'm a New Yorker, I'm an extreme introvert, right? Most people would not guess that. I was always terrified of and terrible at public speaking for most of my life. And then I took a Dale Carnegie course. For those who don't know, Dale Carnegie's famous book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, still a classic, all these almost 100 years later. Feedback is about a conversation. So when I took the Dale Carnegie course and I was offered the opportunity to become a Dale Carnegie trainer, whenever I presented, my mentor, Joe Armentano, who coincidentally I just saw this past weekend, I've stayed in touch with him over the last almost 30 years, I would ask, how did I do? And he would say, how do you think you did? So before he even gave me any feedback, he would ask me how I thought I did. What's one or two or three things I did well, and what's one thing I could have done differently or better, or will do differently or better next time? So if it comes from the person and you ask them, then when you give them their feedback, in a lot of cases, you're just verifying it, or maybe you can point out something that they didn't think of, or that they missed. But try to have that ratio of 3 to 5 positives. So if you give people a list of here's 20 things you did wrong, right? Or if a student writes a paper and I don't say, I really like, your research was good, your writing was good, here are some things that weren't great, but you start with the positives, because it's very rare that unless someone did something really egregiously horrible, you can usually find something positive to find, even if it was just the effort, right? Even if it was just, right? So start with the positive, find something to build on. But that's a great point. It's like, make it a dialogue. Ask the person first what they feel they did well. So at least it lays the foundation for it wasn't 100. Very few things are 100% failure, right? So find the positives and then say, what are one or two things that we could build on for next time? And then I always say success happens not overnight, but over time, right? What if some things, just giving someone feedback doesn't make them better at it the next day? These are things we need to work on over time. So I think that's a key thing too, is to have realistic expectations, and that it's a journey, not, the destination, and it's not going to happen 5 minutes from now or the next day. You need to work on things over time to build habits, and so I'll leave it at that.
And Todd, I will conclude my last question. Is there any tools? You talked about the calendar, then mind mapping. So we have like those flow chart and stuff like that. What can you suggest one or two tools that like business leaders or leaders can use to effectively manage better?
Yeah, to me, I mean, the best tool we have is our pen, right? So just again, you want to get things out of your head and onto paper, whatever it is. If you have colored markers, I always have my colored markers with me right here.
I love my color markers.
Yeah. So again, it's pen and paper, but there's a lot of tools. There's Mural, there's Miro, there's a lot of digital tools as well that help for mind mapping or storyboarding. So again, I think that's the key thing. This is a big question I often get. What if I suffer from ICD, which is I can't draw syndrome, right? What if you are not a great artist? You could still communicate visually. So in fact, I wrote an article for Inc. magazine called Can You Draw What Your Company Does? I do an exercise with business leaders where if they, without words, how would you explain what your company does or what your business does or the biggest challenge you're facing? So they get a big piece of flip chart paper and a pile of markers, and they, without speaking, have 5 minutes to sketch out. Some people draw a mind map or storyboard. Some people draw out a metaphor. Some people map out their supply chain, whatever it is. Then other people could see what you're saying. People could visualize what you're talking about. In fact, a real life example, I was doing this for a group of 20 CEOs, and one said to the other, I've known you for 15 years and I've heard you talk about your problems, but until you sketched it out, I never really understood it. He's like, now I get it. Now I could see the gaps. Now I could see the redundancies. Now I could see how I could help you, right? So again, get it out of your head. So pen and paper or digital. So you could use slides, you could use images, you could use props. Like one of my clients was coaching clients. I was coaching him on Zoom, and he wasn't talking about the main issue. And I said, you're not talking about the elephant in the room, right? So he was ignoring the most important thing. So I keep things on my desk, first of all, to remind me, this reminds me, I'm holding up Gumby for those listening now watch. So Gumby reminds you to be flexible. Sometimes you need to bend over backwards to serve your clients. Right. So I keep things on. There's no magic wand solution. You need to actually do the work. So I have all these things. Coaching tool I use, stop, start, continue, the traffic light. And this is a stress squeezable traffic light. What do you need to stop doing, start doing, and what are some things that you want to continue doing? So I have all of these different toys and props on my desk. I keep to remind me of these models. One of my coaching clients was talking about when I was at IBM in 1980, I said, you think you're impressing your young employees? This is what they're thinking, dinosaur. So I keep this on my desk to remind me to have like current examples and references. So when I use a lot of Seinfeld examples and quotes, but a lot of my students don't know Seinfeld, right? They're from other
Right.
cultures and other generations. So speak the language. So that's just a few examples of hundreds I have all over my desk. But I think that's the key thing. There's all these tools, but they don't need to be technology. They don't need to. AI is a great way. AI could generate images. You could have conversations with AI. So use AI and say, create an image of X, Y, and Z, or describe it and see what it comes up with. It may be right, it may be wrong, but if you start with an image or a model or a sketch, you can build on and improve it, and you can show it to someone else, and they can help you make it better, right? But if it's just in your head, it's very hard for people to see what's in. One of my mantras is that people are not mind readers. I said that to my dog yesterday. I'm like, what do you want? I wish you could just speak. You're 5 years old. Speak. Tell me what you want. I can't, right? Do you want a treat? Do you need to go out? Are you thirsty? Right. So, but that's what it is with, a lot of times managers will say, or leaders will say, didn't you get my memo? Like, they sent a memo out 6 months ago and someone does something. It's like, did you not read my memo? I don't remember your memo. I have 10,000 emails I've gotten since then. Right. So
Right.
challenge of leaders. I always say we're not producing widgets. We're not working on assembly lines. We are producing ideas and we are manufacturing words. Right? Through those words, we get those ideas out of our heads and into the world and into the heads of other people. So if there's one skill people need to develop, it's their communication skills. And visual thinking helps you to do that, to think more visually and communicate more visually. So that's a technique or methodology. But I think the key is just basic communication. I get so many bad emails that take 10 emails to clarify what you've been talking about. Or people, if as a manager you delegate to someone and they don't produce what you expected or what you envisioned, whose fault is that? One of the chapters in my book, Jim, you may have read Ice, Rice, or Mice. I went to a restaurant. I asked for some ice for my drink. They brought me, I said, can I have some more ice? They brought me a bowl of white rice, right? I needed ice. They thought I said rice. Whose fault was that? It was mine. So what could I have done? I might have picked up my glass and said, this is my Yankees mug. I could have, if I pointed to it and said, can I have some ice for my soda? That pointing would have communicated, oh, he needs ice. But the fact that I had rice and I say, can I have some more ice, right? They heard the waiter heard the word rice. So again, it happens all the time. And that's just, I needed more rice anyway, so not a big deal. But people can, and I talk about a mistake that happened in one of my company, a project I was managing that cost the company about $200,000 because we misheard something that a client said that they wanted because it wasn't communicated visually. And we did the wrong thing and we had to redo it and it cost a fortune. So that's a real life example, much more expensive than a $4 bowl of rice.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think sometimes you need to communicate with yourself visually too,
Yes, yeah.
because there's so much power in just being in the right mindset in certain scenarios. So we're in our office, and now because we're in our office, because we're surrounding ourselves with these visual stimuli, now we're in this different mindset because of that. That's probably why so many people working from home during the pandemic, many people struggled because they weren't in the environment that they typically associated mentally with work, with progress. Tell us a little bit about how that works in your life, because I know you mentioned about living in Connecticut and in New York and the different environments that you work in. How do you make sure that you are constantly surrounding yourself with visually stimulating things that keep you in the right mindset?
Yeah, I mean, this really grew to a head during the pandemic. But right now, one of the hottest topics is the whole return to office, work from home, hybrid, conflict and challenge. So, when you're, there's a concept called MBWA, managing by walking around, right? If everyone's in the office, a manager could stop by everyone's desk and say, how's your day going? Pop into my office. Let's go grab some lunch. If people are at home, you can't do that, right? So what's the equivalent of that? A friend of mine, his daughter graduated from college. She's had 3 different jobs, all of them remote. So she's never met a person in person. Right. So she's been working first in her parents in her base in her childhood bedroom and now in an apartment, but it's not the same as meeting people and being in the same place. And so much of culture is the look and feel of the place that you're in, right? When I used to do work at the pharmaceuticals diagnostics company, they had signs and motivational posters all over. One of them was called "We Are They." So the attitude behind we are they is don't ever say, well, they won't let us do that, or they said we are all if we are all leaders and we are the they that other people are talking about, what should we be doing, right? How can we be communicating? Because otherwise you're pointing the finger of blame at everyone with this, they. Well, it's like if you say we are they, it's like, think about that. We are the they that other people are complaining about. Right. So what can we do to not be that way? Right. So that's a great point, is that if you're not, I'm not saying that I love hybrid. I love working from home. I do a lot of solitary work. So I love being able to, and I'm also a night owl. I do most of my work between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. Those are my key hours of productivity. So when people get emails from me at 3 a.m, sometimes I'll get emails from people in London at 3 a.m, my time here in New York, and they're like, what are you still doing up? Or I'll comment on someone's LinkedIn post or whatever. And I'm just a night owl. That's when I'm at my creative peak. If you ask me to do anything creative before noon, forget about it. My brain doesn't start until then. So just knowing when are your peak hours of flow, your peak hours of creativity, realizing that not everyone thinks and is at their best between 9 and 5. Some people decline in the afternoon. Some people hit their stride after lunch. So just know that there's no one size fits all for anyone or anything. And for a leader, you need to realize that. See things through the lens of your people and set them up for success. See what tools they need. Are they getting the support? Some people need a lot of feedback. Some people need and want just a little feedback, right? Some people want to touch base with their manager 5 times a day. Other people like, I'll check in with you in 2 weeks, right? So know again, this is all communication, right? This is all getting to know your people, what they need, and what they want and what works best for them. So again, I think that's the key thing. There's no one size fits all tool for anything. So the more tools you have in your toolkit, the more flexible you'll be and adaptable to different people in different situations.
That's great. Hey, Todd, I have one final question. I do
Yeah.
got to share a quick story with you, but I just want to say, really, very grateful to have your wonderful insights today. My quick story is, you'll appreciate that, being a college professor, is the fact that when I was trying to finish my master's, my final project, I was working with a professor that was my advisor. And I got to be frank with you, back then I was not a very good writer, but it has gotten better. But the bottom line is, my first copy turned in, there was more red than black when I got returned. And so, of course, I was a little embarrassed, but then I went through the whole thing. I had my wife help me because she was a better writer. And so we brought it and sent it in a second time. And when I got it back this time, there was even more red. So I ended up meeting with it. Unfortunately, I ended up going with another advisor. I said, if you make all these corrections and I correct them all, we should be making some progress.
Yeah.
And so that was a good, interesting study on feedback, and how that one didn't work very well for me. But my final question, you had 10 questions that leaders should be able to answer about self-awareness. And I love the questions, so I encourage people to read the book. Can you share one just to kind of close off? Because I love these questions.
Sure. You're testing my memory now. Sometimes people will say something to me. I'm like, oh, was that in my book? I forget. Yeah, the 10 questions are, get people to think as leaders. I say to be more self-aware, ask all these questions. One of them is just basically, how do you personally define leadership? Because there is no one definition of leadership. But a lot of times people, when they think of leaders, they elevate it to, it needs to be Abraham Lincoln, it needs to be Martin Luther King Jr. or Gandhi, or right. A leader could be your grandparent. A leader could be your parent. A leader could be, a sibling or a boss you had, or your high school basketball coach, right? A leader. So I say, who are the public figures that you admire as leaders, but also who are the private figures, right? So think about that. There are leadership lessons hiding in plain sight in every interaction with every person. It could be the waiter or the busboy in the restaurant. It could be, someone was recently at a hospital stay, and he said to me, what got me through was not the nurses or the doctors, but there was this janitor who came around, and he chatted me late at night when I was stressed and anxious and alone, and made me feel better, right? So that janitor was a leader, right? So again, it's not about title, it's about being a leader. And I know you have in your book, there was a bookmark, and one of the things on the bookmark was servant leadership. And I just finished Robert Greenleaf's book on servant leadership, and I'm a big fan of Frances Hesselbein. She said one of her famous quotes is to serve is to lead, and to lead is to live. That's one of her famous quotes, right? So as a leader, ask yourself, is my job to serve or to be served? And I think, if you have a servant leadership mentality, your job is to help get the best and the most out of people and to help develop the next generation of leaders. It's not about power and authority and ego and how big your paycheck is. The best leaders are remembered because they made other people feel like leaders. So that's what I would say is think about who are those people in your life that have made you feel like a leader and help you to become the leader that you are today.
Very well said. Perfectly said, Todd. We can't get enough of this stuff. I mean, we've read so many leadership books and talked with so many great leaders, but we really, I think the whole concept of visual leadership is unique yet so profound. So thank you for all that you've shared with us today. Tell us a little bit about what your future plans are. We got some books coming up in the future that we can look forward to.
Not right now. I'm going to stick with this one. What I say is the people who have like 30 books, it dilutes the one. So for right now, visual leadership
Fair
is
enough.
who I am, what I am, and I'm going to write it out. And it's coming out in China. It was just translated into Mandarin. It's coming on China later this year. So I think there's a lot more that I'm going to focus on visual leadership. I might come out with a paperback field guide or workbook one day that has the models and the tools in it without the stories, to strip down to the worksheets and everything else. But it really is about this new semester is starting right after Labor Day, so I'm gearing up for the fall semester and my executive coaching work, and I do a lot of management leadership training, team building offsites. So it's all going to start again. So I just want this summer. I want to relax, enjoy the summer. By the time people are seeing this, it's probably summer has already ended, and we're well into the fall. So it really is about just moving the ball forward and spreading the word about. See, one last thing. I have all of these basketball metaphors that we use in everyday life. A layup, something easy, right? A slam dunk, 100% guaranteed. Full court press, jump ball, no harm, no foul, run out the clock, shot an air ball or an alley oop, right? Calling someone a chucker or N1 or a buzzer beater, right? So I know just for Jim, Coach Jim, came up with all these. What are some basketball metaphors or terminology we use in everyday life? Think about that. What are the metaphors you use, and try to expand your metaphorical vocabulary? Because a lot of times we stick with what we know and what we like, but if you want to reach more people, you need to speak their language. So try to come up with more metaphors and analogies and stories that will resonate with others. So I'll just leave you with. I could talk for hours, as you can tell. Thank
Yeah,
you
we
for having
love
me
it.
on. This was such a great. You stimulate my brain. I'm on high energy. Probably packed in three
Great.
hours into this 30-minute conversation. But it was great talking to all of you. So I wore my Knicks shirt today because I was in the basketball frame of mind. So, but thank you again for having me. This was such a great
Thank you.
conversation.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Todd. You're a coach as a Marshall Goldsmith 100 coach. Also, you coach executives, you teach students. What is the best way for someone to get in touch with you, learn more about your coaching programs?
Sure. Well, speaking of Marshall Goldsmith's 100 coaches, I have to give a shout out to Scott Osmond and Jacqueline Lane, who are on your show, which is how I found Coach Jim in the first place, right? So if it wasn't for them in that conversation, I wouldn't have even discovered you. So thanks. I need to acknowledge them and Marshall Goldsmith as always. But yeah, the best way to find me, connect with me on LinkedIn. Just say you saw me on this show, and I'm happy to continue the conversation. Or check out my
Mhm.
website at toddcherches.com. I also have bigbluegumball.com, which is my business website, but go to toddcherches.com, learn more about my book, and check out my TED Talk. That's the best way to learn more and to start your journey to becoming a better visual leader.
Links down in
Great.
the show notes, toddchurches.com and Todd Churches on LinkedIn. Thank you, Todd, for your time today, and go Knicks!
Yes.
Yeah.